Thank you for listening to We Have Ways of Making You Talk. Sign up to our Patreon to receive bonus content, live streams, and our weekly newsletter with money off books and museum visits as well, plus early access to all live show tickets. That's patreon.com/wehaveways.
Things change, but Deer Park Natural Spring Water is a constant you can count on, bringing you the essence of home for 150 years and counting. Sourced from carefully selected springs, Deer Park Natural Spring Water has naturally occurring electrolytes for a crisp, refreshing taste. Find Deer Park Natural Spring Water at your favorite local retailer today. After 150 years, there's only one thing left to say. Deer Park, that's still good water.
Airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you.
On the eve of this great adventure, I send my best wishes to every soldier in the Allied keep.
The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Some people call me lucky. At that moment, I was ready to agree. Not having any more tanks inside the square, and it being impossible to bring any more in it without risking having them knocked off one by one as they dove in, I reported to the colonel, who told me to look after the wounded. There were some of the crews of the 2 tanks that were knocked out shortly before mine. I rushed around dodging behind trees and ditches, and managed to steal, beg, or borrow a good number of self-heating tins of soup, chocolate, and some blankets. I am glad to say that I was able to make things more pleasant for these poor beggars. They did not complain or moan even, they just lay there, bleeding and silent. When I had done what I could for them, I again reported to the colonel, who was still sticking it in the ditch with the most appalling mortar fire falling all around. The Boche was using heavy mortars, and the result of being hit by one of those is not pretty to look at. The colonel looked worried. He turned round when I arrived and looked at me in the manner of a child telling a doubtful story. "John," he said, "I have bad news for you." I didn't answer, just felt a little puzzled and waited for what was to follow. The colonel then said, "Keith has been killed." I simply stared at him, and I felt hot tears running down my cheek. Keith, my only real friend, and he who had been through the whole African business. Of all people, Keith had to be killed after 3 days in France. I then felt a wave of bitter resentment and a desire for revenge sweep over me. I walked away across the open and found my tank waiting outside the square. That's very, very powerful. That's John Bethel Fox writing about the death of Keith Douglas.
Yep, the great poet.
The great poet, Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, legend really, whose extraordinary book, Alamein to Zemzem, tells the story of armoured warfare in the desert, which he'd survived, got through despite being injured, and then is killed in Normandy. Welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk, the Second World War podcast with me, Al Murray, and James Holland. And that's a somber moment to begin, but this is...
Well, it is, but the point is to kind of illustrate that in these days following D-Day, it might look like the Allies aren't going quite as fast as they might be, but it doesn't mean there's not really, really intense, heavy fighting going on. You know, and people are not losing their lives because they absolutely are. I mean, the numbers of casualties that are coming in those first days, D+1, +2, +3, +4, are really, it's really bad. And it's amazing how we've compartmentalized Normandy into D-Day, followed by major actions, Operation Epsom or whatever, or Cobra or Goodwood, and then the end. And it's kind of doing a disservice to all the to the nuance of the campaign, but it's also doing a disservice to all those people who were struggling through at those kind of early phases.
Yeah.
When the fighting is really, really tough, it's really, really hard fighting in Normandy.
Well, and also it's hard fighting in Normandy. And you I mean, on the British contingent has experienced formations and people who are completely green, right? And Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry are the former, not the latter. But basically, everyone from top to bottom is having to figure out how you fight in Northwest Europe now.
Including the Germans.
Yes, exactly. Everyone is having to figure that out. And it may well be that you're experienced in the desert and so on, but this is very, very different country. I suppose the closest thing anyone's done to this is the fighting in the summer of 1940, where you're fighting the Germans in France. But even then, things have moved on so dramatically. The weapon systems have changed. The way of doing things has changed. The ranges have changed. I mean, that's the other thing is everything's got bigger and further apart, and faster and nastier. And you're absolutely right, Jim. It does tend to get sort of blocked off. And particularly, I think the way it gets chopped up is D-Day. And we talked about this the other day, that the casualties aren't anything like what they expect they're going to run into. So sometimes I think people put that in their mind as well. Normandy kind of goes well. Yep. Whereas in fact, it's really bad. It's just
a brutal business from the off. Is the truth of it.
It's hideous. Yeah.
But I think it's worth going back. We left it with sort of night falling on D-Day, the 6th of June.
Yes.
So where are we at? Well, obviously, it means that Eisenhower can scrunch up the failure broadcast that he'd had ready just in case. He can screw that into a ball, chuck that into the waste paper bin. That's done. He's got reason to be pleased.
Yeah.
75,215 British and Canadian troops ashore, 57,500 Americans, and 23,000 airborne troops. I mean, there's not a single beach that has failed.
Yeah.
Every single one has been a success.
Yeah.
They're all ashore. The crust has been broken. And this is one of the concerns that Rommel had, was that they're just not ready because they've got the crust, but even the crust hasn't got enough mines. It's got some mines. It hasn't got enough rows of beach obstacles. It's got some. It's got enough Rommel asparagus to put off some gliders, but not all.
Yeah.
And there's no real second line of defense. The second line of defense is very, very underdeveloped. So once you do break through that crust, you can start pushing inland in quite a big way. And, they're kind of 4 to 7 miles inland. I mean, that's an amazing effort.
And what's to come is also quite extraordinary. I mean, again, the Mulberry is on its way, is going to be assembled shortly. So as well as breaking the crust, you need room for all these supplies, for all the stuff that's coming, that's arriving, for these fields full of tanks that you're going to have, and the airfields that you're planning to build, and all this sort of stuff. So the lodgement needs to be a success in that regard as well, doesn't it? Because you need space, and you need the space to be safe from enemy artillery. So what happens in the next 2 or 3 days following D-Day is incredibly important.
Yep.
Yes, D-Day's, as you say, it won't need to read out that we did everything we possibly could and I bear the responsibility note. He won't have to do that. But what's got to happen now? Because if the long-term plan's going to work, you need to be expanding now, don't you? Not breaking out, but expanding and consolidating and pushing the Germans far enough back.
Exactly, because what you're getting out over each beach is you're getting a little sort of semicircle.
Yeah.
Like a little sort of cloud, top of a cloud. And, you need the whole thing to sort of... Yes, and you need the whole thing to kind of sort of join up. But even, and a shout out for the British 3rd Division at Sword Beach. Yes, they didn't get to Caen. We know that. No, it wasn't a failure. And certainly as dusk is falling, they've overrun Hillman. They haven't got all of them to kind of surrender because they're down in the bunkers.
Yeah.
And if we ever get to Hillman, one can see that. It's really worth a visit to anyone who ever goes to Normandy. Colonel Krug is still in his bunker and he doesn't surrender till the following morning. But I mean, it's overrun by dusk. The 716th Infantry Division, German 716th Infantry Division, basically ceased to exist. It's drips and drabs. It's completely lost any kind of cohesion. It's just people kind of fleeing backwards. Yep. Some of them are getting absorbed into the 352nd Infantry Division. Some of them are getting absorbed into 21st Panzer. But as a command structure, it doesn't exist. Now, you've got to say all of that is pretty much kind of what's not to like from an Allied point of view.
I've been really hung up on thinking about the Mulberry the last few days since we started talking about all this, because the German strategy amounts to, and we'll see this, orders are drive the enemy back into the sea, right? That's the kind of the extent of the strategic thinking, which really kind of amounts to tactical thinking as much as anything else. And that there is a thing like the Mulberry coming. The Germans haven't imagined that, have they?
Not at all.
So what are they thinking? Are they thinking, well, then the Allies, once they've landed here, how are they going to... What are they thinking?
I think they're thinking very quickly. They realise that... I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, I was just looking at the other day at the diary of Martin Purple, who's in... He was in the 1st Falconry Division in the MG Battalion, served on Crete, served in Norway back in... 1940, was on Crete, was in Eastern Front, then Sicily, then Southern Italy, then nearly had a testicle ripped off in a car crash,
right?
A truck crash. Recovers and gets sent to 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, under von der Heiter, which is the kind of the only half decent infantry there is really in Normandy.
Yeah,
and he's sent up the church spire of Carentan, and he's in the Carentan looking out, and all he can see is the sea is just sort of black. with invasion boats and warships and landing crafts. And he just thinks, how can we compete with this? I think that's a universal response from the Germans when they see all this.
When they actually see it, when they clap eyes on it. Yes,
and there's that amazing photograph of Omaha Beach on sort of D+3 or 4. And it's just black with huge, great landing ships and landing, LCTs and ant lines of trucks and bulldozers and columns of men and barrage balloons hanging over, above them and all the rest of it. And you just think, holy moly. I mean, look at that. A few days earlier, it was a scene of huge carnage. And now look at it. That's the industrial muscle. That's what they needed in Italy, frankly. They don't have. If you're Germans and you see that, it's really shocking. What's really interesting is all those 10 Panzer divisions, those mobile divisions, those 9 Panzer divisions and 1 Panzer Grenadier division that are suddenly coming towards the front. They don't know about this. This is all new.
This is what I'm angling at.
So they're cocky. They're kind of full of it.
But they're not considering, I mean, they're not thinking, well, surely if the Allies are going to, this is the invasion or even a feint, the Allies aren't going to do this in a half-hearted way. I mean, how are they not thinking that?
I just think the majority of them aren't. I think we should concentrate on the 12th SS Hitlerjugend division because
let's do that.
Because one of the single most important engagements of the entire Normandy campaign happens on D+1, the 7th of June, Wednesday, the 7th of June, 1944. And this is between the Canadians, or a very small proportion of the Canadians, and the 12th SS as they're arriving, and indeed sort of parts of the 21st Panzer Division and remnants of the 716th Division. And it is such an important engagement because it tells you so much about the nature of the fighting that is to come. Well,
and the illusions, the shattering of illusions for both, but not for both sides. I mean, I think far more for the Germans in terms of what they are going to be able to do as the campaign continues, and how that then feeds into what their strategy turns into and what they're trying to do for the campaign.
Yeah. So what happens is they get the go ahead to get moving. I think they get moving at something I think we said in the earlier episode, sort of 4:32 p.m. on the afternoon of the 6th of June. They've got, they're near Paris, so they've got over 100 miles to go. When you're moving a whole division, and these divisions are double the size of an infantry division. One of these sort of rubbish static divisions full of people wearing German uniforms. Yeah, they're about 10 to 12,000 strong, if that. On the 1st of June, the 12th SS is 20,540 strong. So that's a very big armoured division.
Yeah, and properly equipped and politically motivated and all that stuff, right?
Bristling with weaponry.
Right.
But they've got all the prime movers, they've got the half tracks, they've got the trucks, they've got those massive, great kind of tracked vehicles with the wheels at the front. What do they call Hanemags?
Yeah,
they've got those.
Hanemags, yeah.
They've got Panzer IVs. They're about to be joined by the Schwer Battalion 101. The heavy Panzer Battalion under Michael Wittmann of Tigers. They're proper and commanded by Brigade Führer Witt. And of course, they're not just coming. It's not 20,000 and 20,000 and a half men all coming up at once up the kind of, the M1. It doesn't, or Route 66 or something. It's not like that. What you do is you're all in different bits. You're concentrated over an area of, I don't know, perhaps sort of 15 square miles, something like that, somewhere near Paris. You get your marching orders and you're given your routes that you've got to take. So one panzer regiment will take this road, one battalion will take another. Yep. And so they're all coming in drips and drabs, but the spearhead is the 25th Panzer, SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, which is 100% motorized, commanded by Panzer Lehr.
And the orders are drive the enemy who had broken through into the sea and destroy him. And
yes.
if anyone's going to be able to do that in the German infantry, then it should be these guys, right?
Yeah, yep.
And that's certainly what they think.
Yeah, and they're super gung ho. 12th SS is laced through with real veterans, proper people who've been on the Eastern Front, who know what they're about, got the T-shirt, all the rest of it, and lots of young firebrands who are absolutely indoctrinated, totally kind of into the whole thing, absolutely prepared to lay down their lives for the Führer, all that kind of stuff, and are just cocksure, cocky, well-disciplined, highly motivated, and absolutely, completely determined to destroy the enemy. Yeah. Failure is not something they can contemplate.
Yeah.
Those kind of types. They're right little Hitlers. I mean, they're little fascist bastards, basically. The reconnaissance battalion gets there probably just before midnight, actually. Mm. And there's reports of them getting sort of between the coast, between 3rd Division and Juno, or sort of getting close to it. Just doing a little recce, just, not getting too involved, but just checking the lay of the land. But Panzer Lehr gets to overnight. He arrives just at the edge of Caen, near Carpiquet, and sets himself up in the Abbey d'Ardennes, which is this old monastery, and it's still there. And you can absolutely go up into the kind of the tower overlooking the main abbey church, where he stood at the dawn of 7th of June, looked out, and he could see Douvres, the little sort of tiny cathedral city of Douvres. He could see the beaches, he could see the warships out at sea. And he could see signs of battle and, in the distance. And he thought, right, let's freaking do it. But he's got to wait for everyone to turn up.
Yes, that's all very well. So Carpiquet is west of Caen, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. And it's southwest of Caen, and that is the airfield. And it's a really obvious objective for the Allies. And it's a really obvious place from which, to launch a counterattack. Yeah.
But of course, you've got to have gone all the way round because the airborne landings have secured that flank. So he's already had to go further than he wanted to.
Yeah, because he's near Paris.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's got to do this big loop round.
Yeah, exactly. And to properly disrupt the landings at Sword, ideally you'd be coming in from the flank, but you can't. So whatever you're going to do, you're going to have to meet it head on.
Yep, and already on the way up there, they're getting a little tester of what's to come because all the way they're harried. And of course, this is a problem of moving by night. Is the nights are very short. It's not dark till 11 and it's kind of light at 6. So you've only got kind of 6-7 hours of darkness in which to kind of do these moves.
Yeah.
Moving by darkness is also slow.
Yeah.
So it's problematic. And
staying organised is very, very difficult.
Yeah, and they're getting harried as they're moving up as they would. So originally they're supposed to attack at midday, but there's absolutely no chance of that because obviously he's not going to attack until he's got the full weight of his 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. But by the early afternoon, by kind of 2:33-ish, he's got 50 artillery pieces, most of which are, they're all with gun tractors or self-propelled guns or whatever. 50 panzers, all Panzer IVs.
Yeah.
Each Panzer Grenadier battalion of the 3 battalions of this regiment have got 69 machine guns, except the 3rd battalion under Milius, who's a absolute piece of work.
Yeah.
But he's got 151.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a lot.
So they're basically double the machine gun quotient, which is a thing the Fallschirmjäger do, isn't it? But it's interesting you've got that in this mechanized formation.
Yeah, and he is coordinating with 21st Panzer, which is Kampfgruppe Rauch, which is under Oberst, that's Colonel Josef Rauch. And he's got 24 self-propelled 105s.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a regiment.
Yep.
That's what 24 guns is, and 400 millimeter guns, and the drips and drabs from the 716. So there's quite a force that is there blocking Caen and ready to strike down towards the coast between the Canadians and the British. That's where they're heading for.
Yeah.
But at the same time, of course, the British and the Canadians are moving inland. So 50th Division, to whom who were landing on Gold Beach, they're moving southwards. And 8th Armour Brigade, which of course includes, my friends in the Sherwood Rangers, they're part of kind of capturing Bayeux at the very first hours of the 7th of June. And then they're pushing on to point 103, this ridge overlooking the Soule Valley, which is, so about 12 to 14 miles south of the coast.
Yeah.
That's by kind of mid-morning on the 7th.
Yeah, that's going some. And that kind of distance puts the beach itself out of range of German artillery, doesn't it? That's what you need to have happening in the first few days, isn't it? So that you can unload on the beach, build up safely. And they've done it already. It's already happening.
Exactly. And straight away, in the same way that the 25th Panzer Grenadier Regiment is attacking from Carpiquet, another part of the 12th SS is pushing down towards Adroy and this little village beneath point 103 and towards Bayeux. So, there's lots of fighting going on, but I think the most significant engagement on that first day is the Canadians pushing south. So you've got the ones that landed at Saint-Aubin. You remember my friend Bob Roberts, who was doing...
flame-throwing people in...
all that. Yeah.
Fortifications, yeah.
Yep. So they're on the Distal Fink radar station, which has kind of bogged them down, which although it's been badly hit by RAF Typhoons in the run-up to D-Day, is still manned by Germans, and there's a fight going on. And most of the brigade and the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division artillery is being used on that as well.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's an urgency to try and get Carpiquet.
That's so you can base your fighter cover there and have it loiter rather than have to fly across the channel, basically.
Right. Exactly that.
That speeds everything up.
It's a ready-made airfield. You haven't got to make one. So, and also it's clearly a significant objective.
Yeah.
So it is the Nova Scotias. So while the North Shore Regiment, which is my friend Bob Eldon and his mate Lacroix with the flamethrower, while they're on the Distal Fink near Douvres, the Nova Scotias and the Sherbrooke Fusiliers, which is a tank regiment, Sherman Regiment, they're told to hurry up and get on to Carpiquet. But they haven't got any artillery support. And the forward observer, the naval forward observer, can't get a radio link to the offshore naval guns.
Yeah, so can't call in the big stuff.
No. So it is Sherman tanks and infantry making this advance on their own.
Right, okay.
And they're doing all right. They get to Buron and they go through there and that's fine. And then they get to the little village of Authie, which is only about 2 to 3 miles from Carpiquet. I mean, you can see Carpiquet from there. It's really not. And from the Abbaye d'Ardenne is literally nothing. It's a few fields away to kind of off the edge of the village. I mean, once you're in OT and you're driving to the Abbaye d'Ardenne, you're there in a matter of minutes. And it's this point that they get hit by the full whack of the 25th SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. They haven't seen them. There's in Normandy, if anyone's been to Normandy, you get them quite a lot in these old villages. You get these big sort of square, like giant water troughs. And they're the old kind of sort of places where the villagers would do their washing.
Yeah.
So the Nova Scotias are there and they're all filling up their water bottles because actually it's a really hot day on the second half of the 7th of June. Sun's come out and all the rest of it. And so they're exhausted and thirsty. Obviously, they didn't hardly get any sleep the night before. So they're pausing and then suddenly they get attacked. But the village, because they're in the centre of the village, they haven't seen the advance of these Panzer Grenadiers on the fields from the Abbaye d'Ardenne.
Yeah.
And suddenly the tanks are following up and all these machine guns just let rip.
Yeah.
And they're basically sort of,
bounced.
They're bounced, yeah. And it is the 3rd Battalion, this one with the 151 machine guns plus lots of Panzer IVs, that really causes the damage. And this is the one that's commanded by Obersturmbannführer Karl-Heinz Milius.
Yeah.
Who's an ex-Dachau guard. He's a proper kind of old street fighter, Nazi thug.
Yeah. So they execute wounded Canadians and run them over.
So they cut them all up and they're all kind of lying on the side of the road, sort of groaning and bleeding out. And he orders the tanks to just run them over.
Yeah. And
the civilians afterwards have to clean them up and they have to pick them up with shovels. I mean, it's like roadkill. Well, I mean, it is roadkill. Exactly what it is.
It's horrible.
It's absolutely horrible. And of the 110 Canadians that are killed that day, at least 37 are executed, and most of those are taken back to the Abbaye d'Ardenne and executed in the grounds of the Abbaye d'Ardenne, right under the noses of Mayer.
Yeah, and this means subsequently that the Canadians tend not to take any prisoners, right?
Yes, but what is really interesting about this is that they push them back to Buron, which is only a mile and a half, 2 miles max before OT. I mean, this is all really, really small scale stuff.
Yeah.
In the car, you're there in a matter of moments. They push them back there, by which point the Canadian artillery has started to be directed towards them, and they've managed to get the radio link up with the offshore guns. And 12 SS get no further.
Right.
They make absolutely no dent. So this is, when you're talking about, elite troops in inverted commas and the tactical genius of the Germans and, their ability to just be able to respond to any situation and bristling with weaponry and all that stuff. These guys can't kick back a single infantry battalion and one tank regiment more than 2 miles.
Yeah.
That's as far as they get when they're in the kind of first flush of, they've only just got to the front, they've got all, apart from sort of losing a few things en route, they've basically got their full inventory.
Yeah.
They're fresh, they're not tired, they're kind of good to go, they're all absolutely pumped, ready for the scrap. They get nowhere.
Yeah.
Really. They do. I mean, they stop the Canadians getting to Carpiquet and they push them back a couple of miles, but they've definitely got a 3-1 advantage.
Well, and they got the 3-1 advantage. This is supposedly them pushing the Allies back into the sea, isn't it? And they can't.
Right.
What they're meant to do is well beyond their grasp. And that's because attacking is really, really hard, isn't it?
That's my point. That is
it comes
my point.
down to attacking is difficult.
So what are your conclusions from this? Well, one conclusion is the Canadians are better than they've been given the credit for.
Yeah.
Secondly, that 12 SS aren't quite as elite as everyone says they are. Well, the third thing, and I think this is the really main point, attacking in Normandy is incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it's hard.
And it cuts both ways, obviously. It's really hard to attack. And it's really interesting, that landscape, because when you think of Normandy, everyone thinks of bocage and hedgerows and all the rest of it. But actually, that bit is really wide open.
Yeah.
It's rolling landscape. So it's not little kind of nooks and crannies and little rivers, valleys, and whatever. This is big, wide, open wheat fields, not a lot of hedgerows.
Yeah.
You can see for miles, from the top of the Abbaye d'Ardennes, you can absolutely see the coastline all the way down to the sea and beyond and all that kind of stuff. So you can see them coming. And the Canadians can direct artillery fire onto this attack. And they just get nowhere.
But this very much is going to be what happens from now on, isn't it, essentially?
Absolutely. So it's a warning shot for the Allies. I mean, if you want to know how difficult this is going to be, just look at the 12 SS on D+1.
But also, if you want to see what the Germans are actually going to try and do, it's going to be this again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah, but also, if your Germans are so brilliant, why don't they do better on D+1?
Well, exactly. Right, we need to take a very quick break, and then we'll be back with, we may even get to D+2. You never know your luck.
Things change, but Deer Park Natural Spring Water is a constant you can count on, bringing you the essence of home for 150 years and counting. Sourced from carefully selected springs, Deer Park Natural Spring Water has naturally occurring electrolytes for a crisp, refreshing taste. Find Deer Park Natural Spring Water at your favorite local retailer today. After 150 years, there's only one thing left to say. Deer Park, that's still good water.
Welcome back to Weird Ways of Making You Talk, where the problems are laying themselves bare essentially within 36 hours of the Allies arriving in town.
Yeah, so up on the base of the Cotentin, the 82nd Airborne have held on to Lafayette. Do you remember that bridge that was over and the causeway that's going across the flooded Murderay Valley? They managed to hold on there. They get relieved by the Glider Regiment a couple of days later. So that's okay. 101st Airborne are pushing south towards Carentan, heading towards Combe du Mont, and coming up against the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. We talked about them in the first half, under von der Heuter and my friend Martin Purple. 4th Infantry Division, the ones who've landed with 43 killed in action on D-Day, they're having a much tougher time of it.
Yes, gets much more difficult.
Yeah, because unlike the area around where 12 SS are attacking near Caen, it absolutely is the bocage. And this is these incredibly small, we'll talk about that in a subsequent episode, but this is these very, very small fields, one after the other, which actually, from a defensive point of view, gives you a very good mobile defense. Yeah. Much more effective than a concrete bunker.
Yeah.
Because you can hide behind it, held them up, and then disappear back to the next one.
It automatically gives you defense in depth. It offers you that as a default, doesn't it?
Yes, and the problem with the 4th Infantry are finding, as will the 9th Infantry when they land and join the fight, as will the 90th when they join and fight as well, is that they haven't trained for this. They're not expecting to have to take field by field, and they don't know what to do. And what's happening is the only way to do it is to cross through a hedge, at which point on the far side of the hedge, you've got, the far end of the field, you've got these machine guns who just cut you to pieces. And, they're getting absolutely hammered. Long-sur-Mer, for example, those 4 guns, one of which was knocked out by HMS Ajax on D-Day. The site, although the guns have stopped firing by about 6:30 a.m. on D-Day, the site is overrun the following morning on the 7th of June. And that's also the day that Port-au-Bessin is captured by number 47 Commando, which is a fantastic little action. So you've got these little cliffs running down into the port, either side of it. They've got bunkers on either side. They do this fantastic set-piece attack, manage to pull it off, do take it, and that is where the Mulberry A, the American Mulberry, is going to be set up.
It's going to be plugged in,
Meanwhile, of course, Hitler's issued his no-retreat order. Yeah, of course he has.
Of course he has. I mean, what else is he going to do? I mean, the Germans are never going to figure out actually what to do about the Allies. Is the truth. So that they should start there, I think, is entirely appropriate, isn't it? With something as wildly impractical as that.
What? There's no retreating.
Yeah. Well done, everyone. Yeah.
But at the same time, General Kreis, who is the commander of the 352nd Division, and for those who were listening to the earlier episodes, remember that there was that 352nd who had that mobile, in inverted commas, reserve that was using purloined French trucks and bicycles and careering around Normandy on D-Day night. So it's the remnants of the 352nd that have been holding on to and fighting around Pont-de-Hoc, where the Rangers they took it very easily on D-Day, but D+1, D+2, they're in a right old pickle. They're running out of ammo. The Rangers and 29th Infantry are trying to get to them and rescue them from Omaha Beach, but there's a mighty ding-dong going on. But Kreis recognizes that they're not going to win that particular fight, and they need to pull back, and they need to pull back to the new Hauptkampflinie, the kind of main line of defense, which is very underdeveloped, but is a number of miles back.
Yeah.
And General Kreis tells this to General Marx, who's the 84 Corps commander. And he says, we're going to have to do this or else my entire division is going to be destroyed. And Marx has a kind of a quiet moment on his own to consider this, because obviously Hitler's just said no more retreats. But then he says, okay, we'll just do it overnight, but do it on the quiet.
I mean, it's just the fact that the generals are having to do this, and that they're, I mean, the idea that you would say, do retreat, but don't tell anyone you're going to. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes, I know, but he's worried about people like Dolman, who is the army commander. He's a big fat Nazi, and he doesn't want to be grasped.
But it's completely ridiculous, isn't it?
It's like totally ridiculous. And this is why I don't understand this fetishization of German forces, because if your generals aren't able to do what they need to do, then they're not going to be leading your troops very well, which then means your troops aren't very good. But also, man for man, they can't be better because they're not able to do what they need to do. They're fighting pointlessly. So they're just not. Anyway, bottom line is they pull out over the night from Pont-de-Hoc and from the coast for good on the night of the 8th, 9th June. So D+2+3. And Pont-de-Hoc is finally kind of cleared the following morning, the 9th of June, and the Rangers are relieved. And then they push on along the coast, because what they've got to do is they've got to push southwards, which is left to the big red one, the 1st Infantry Division, who are attacking on that kind of eastern side of Omaha Beach. Yeah. They're pushing inland straight away, while the 29th Infantry Division is actually pushing along the coast to try and link up with 101st Airborne pushing south from Utah Beach. Yeah. That's the key gap in the line. So everything else is all starting to join up very nicely, but that's the big hole. That hinge between the base of the Cotentin Peninsula and the Vire River and the north coast of Normandy. Yeah. But meanwhile, the Panzer Lehr.
Panzer Lehr are coming. I mean, this is the other thing. They're all arriving. I mean, it's all piecemeal. It's obviously the Allies have planned a thing that in the end, that whatever happens, the Germans are going to bite off more than they can chew. But the way they're going about this it's such a mess, isn't it?
Well, for my money, man for man, Panzer Lehr are the best unit in Normandy. Right. Because in Fritz Bayerlein, they've got probably the best suited divisional commander for Normandy, because he's fought the Allies. He was chief of staff of the Africa Corps, then commanded it briefly. He's a desert veteran. He understands about air power. and Western Allied air power. He's fought in the early stages in the Blitzkrieg years. He's fought on the Eastern Front. He's a man of vast experience. And the Panzer Lehr are taken from the training schools, so they've got this hardcore of NCOs and officers who really, really know what they're about.
Yeah.
And so they're just very good. And they're smaller. They're a kind of 14,000 strong division rather than a 20,000 one like 12 SS. But they're very competent, very well equipped, got decent people who know what they're about and experienced officers. So that puts them in a really, really good position, I think. And Bearline is ordered to start moving from their deployment area around Le Mans, which is about 110 miles away from where they are. And again, on the afternoon of D-Day around 4 o'clock. And he goes, this is just insane. Don't expect me to move by daylight. This has to be done by nighttime. And Dolman says, no, you got to move. Got to move now. And he says, this is going to be a disaster.
And lo and behold, it is. It's Jabo Rennstrecker, isn't it? The fighter bomber racecross. It's, again, we come to this command problem. Is he's not allowed to do it properly. Bearline knows that if he travels by day, his division will be degraded. So the safer thing to do is travel by night so that when the moment comes, you're as strong as you possibly can be. And he's overruled.
No, because you've got to move now so that you can kick the Allies back into the sea. It's like, really? It's already too late, mate.
Well, and also, won't I have more chance of doing that if I arrive at fuller strength? I mean, and obviously they're thinking, oh, Christ, it's the invasion. We need to crack on with this as quickly as possible, but more haste, less speed, perhaps. Simple as that, isn't it?
And, he and Alexander Hartgenden is one of his staff officers, and he writes a diary and gets interviewed post-war as well, as does Bearline. And they talk about these absolute horror stories of sort of going past these burning columns of trucks and stuff that have been hit by fighter bombers. And, just getting to the front, they lose 84 half-tracks prime movers and SP guns out of 700. That's a lot.
More than 10%.
Well, imagine what 84 half-tracks looks like.
Yeah.
And trucks.
Yeah.
130 trucks get lost.
Yeah.
And 5 tanks. Before you've even got there. And as Bearline says, these are serious losses for a division not yet come into action.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because it makes you circle round and round that argument of they're really not very good at this stage of the war, are they? Whatever it is they've learned, they've forgotten or are not digesting or are unable to act on.
I think it's more the latter. I mean, they just, the Luftwaffe has, to all intents and purposes, been defeated in Northwest Europe.
Yeah.
The roads Luftwaffe, they do come over, but it tends to be at night only, and it's sort of, it's jitter raids.
I mean, if you were to try and deal with this invasion in any other way, say you decide to phase line back to the Seine and build a redoubt on the Seine, then the Allies are going to build up, you're giving the Allies Normandy, from which they could then
have even more airfields.
Smash you up with even more airfields, more air power.
Yeah, so who's to say that Hitler was wrong?
About this one thing, honestly.
But anyway, so they arrive south of Tilly-sur-Seulles.
Yeah.
And the Sherwood Rangers and 8th Armoured Brigade are on the top of Point 103, looking down from the northern part of the valley overlooking the Seulles, and Panzer Lehr are in the southern part. So it drops down to Tilly-sur-Seulles. There's a little Seulles River Valley.
Yeah.
And there's sort of low ridges kind of progressing either side of them. I've stood up on that ridge where Panzer Lehr came to reach the front, and it's interesting. You can't see the sea or anything from there, but you can look across at Point 103 and you can see what your objective's got to be. That's where they get to, and they're starting to arrive there from sort of late on the 7th and into overnight on the 8th. But there's a gap, obviously, because this is units being hurried to the front, immediately finding themselves engaged. Not any chance to recce or anything like that. They're just flung straight into it, which is what happens to 12th SS. Panzer Lehr pretty much. I mean, they're starting to kind of attack on the 8th down towards Tilly on the 8th of June. Yeah. And there's a gap between those two divisions, which potentially could be exploited.
Yes. And that's a real what happens next question of sport moment, isn't it? For those who know the Normandy campaign, what happens to 7th Armoured next, I think is anyway, we won't get there yet, will we?
No.
The key thing here is air power is everything, isn't it? And it's going to become more and more so once the Allies establish airfields in Normandy itself. But you've got, fighter pilots flying 4 sorties.
Maximum effort, though. It's very unusual.
Exactly, yeah. But incredibly effective as a result. So this is why Panzer Lehr arrive degraded. There's an airstrip put in behind Utah Beach, which I think is absolutely amazing that you're doing that on, You're doing that immediately.
And behind Omaha as well.
By Omaha, which is incredible. So
So Tom Neal is the first Allied fighter pilot to land.
Yeah.
He lands on D+1.
Extraordinary. And then an airstrip in the British sector as well. And engineers coming in. I mean, it's just the depth of the planning. Radar sets are ashore, ground control, basically the whole thing, to the point where by D+4, 9th Tactical Air Command have a tactical HQ. They have a headquarters in France.
Yep, at Crickville. Yeah, it's literally just south of Verville.
It's incredible. And as we touched on right at the start of the episode, the Mulberries are on their way. And the Mulberries have, the first thing you've got to put in is the breakwater. So the block ships arrive.
10:30 a.m., D+1, the first block ships at Arromanches are there.
Yeah, and the Gooseberry harbours are completed at Arromanches and Port-en-Bessin by D+4, by the 10th of June.
Yeah, the Phoenixes, which are these huge, great 200-foot long, great big rectangular blocks that look like sort of giant shipping containers, they're first starting to be fixed in by the 11th of June. And basically by the 14th of June, you've got a Mulberry.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Open for trade. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing.
And all done in secret and all done, beyond the Germans' imagining as well. It's the other thing. They're not expecting
Beyond the Germans' imagining, yeah.
Yeah. On the 9th of June, the Rangers have taken the Grand Camp Maisie battery overlooking the River Vire. So they're basically on the move now, aren't they? They're getting going. 29th Division are inland. 1st Infantry Division are also making progress.
Yeah, they're making 1st Division making really good progress.
Yeah.
They're now well ahead of everybody else. Because the Germans haven't got any answer. The 352nd Infantry Division can't be everywhere.
No. And by this point, isn't anywhere, really. It's been
Yes, and what they're actually thinking of doing is they're pulling back to this ridge line to the north of Saint-Lô, which is, good 15 miles inland.
Yeah.
With rear guards and snipers in church towers and all that kind of stuff and mines and what have you. But there's not much going on in this section. So they're getting a sort of fairly easy path. But obviously the hinge and Cotentin Peninsula is key. So 101st Airborne are having quite a sticky time with the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. And, it's very difficult. But on the 9th of June alone, the 352nd Infantry Division, the German 352nd Infantry Division, loses 2,000 men. So that's a fifth of its fighting strength, just in one day. And that's after what's already come before on Omaha Beach. The mobile reserve gone. So they're down to kind of, 25-30% of what they were a few days earlier.
Well, and in these days, you lose a third of your strength. That you're no longer combat effective.
They've lost 2/3.
I know. So I mean, what on earth state are they in? It's quite extraordinary.
And all German troops are all sort of going. There is the Luftwaffe.
Well, I mean, where is the Luftwaffe? It's not that they don't. I mean, they do fly the odd sortie, don't they? There is the odd Messerschmitt.
Yeah, they tend to be kind of sort of jitter raids at night and that kind of stuff. A lone Ju-88 comes in low and drops a couple of bombs and what have you. But they're too far away, and it's not safe for them to be on airfields close to the front, so they can't be. So it has to be this way. So it tends to be much more kind of bombers with longer range than it is fighters. But it's horrendous.
But as ever, there's a meanwhile, isn't there, Jim? Because this is relentless, unrelentless. It's a lasagna of meanwhiles for the Normandy campaign, isn't it? And right, I mean, I don't know how many layers of the lasagna we've worked our way down to. I mean, I just want to point out I love lasagna. So meanwhile,
Carentan. You can't say Carentan.
No, you can't say Carentan.
Carentan.
No,
it's Carentan.
6th Fallschirmjäger.
They're defending Carentan.
This is parachutist on parachutist hot action. But they're getting smashed up, 6th Fallschirmjäger, aren't they?
Completely, because they've been in it right since the word go. It's now kind of, 10th of June.
Yeah.
So D+4.
Yeah.
And they've been absolutely hammered. And
they have nothing like the gunnery to answer anything that the Allies
they have got a heavy weapons company, which has got some anti-tank guns. They've got sort of Panzerschrecks, Panzerfaust, that kind of stuff. They've got some anti-aircraft guns, I think. They've got double the number of machine guns.
Yeah.
So they've got loads and loads of MG42s. But the 1st Battalion has been largely annihilated. Just 25 escaped from St. Com, the fight across that, and getting across the Douve River. And for those of you who've watched Band of Brothers, which I'm assuming is literally everyone who's listening to this, you'll remember the sort of picture.
If you haven't, could you please stop listening to the podcast? You're not welcome here.
just get with it. So it's just the 3rd Battalion which is holding Carentan, and that's my friend Martin Purple. But by the evening of the 10th of June, Freiherr von der Heiter, who's the commander of 6th Fallschirmjäger, has decided that Carentan,
you've got to sack it off.
You've got to sack it off. It's not going, because there's this, what you've got is coming from the east. You've got the 29th Infantry Division and those Rangers who've just got, Grand Camp Maisie and all that. They're coming down, and it kind of, the foot of the Cotentin Peninsula drops a little bit further south, as does the north coast of Normandy, the main invasion coast, and it drops into this little kind of sort of inverted salient of kind of sort of river salient, estuary salient, and Carentan is just below that. There's a river, there's the Dives River and there's a Via River.
If it's the hand and the little finger, it's in there in where your little finger meets your
exactly.
hand.
But it's completely untenable, and he needs to pull back. So he pulls back his headquarters about 7 miles south. But on the evening of the 10th of June, he's just got there when Brigadeführer Werber Ostendorf turns up, who is the commander of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Götz von Berlichingen.
Götz von Berlichingen.
Berlichingen.
Anyway, but he turns up saying, "Don't worry, cavalry's here.
Yeah.
Panzers are in town. We'll deal with these paratroopers for you. Don't so stick around."
Yeah. These Americans, we're going to kick them back into the sea.
Oh God, here we go again.
Yeah. Yet another kind of over-optimistic, cocksure SS Panzer Grenadier type. Yeah. This is, interestingly, the 17th SS is the only non-pure Panzer division.
Right.
It's a Panzer Grenadier division, which basically is a motorised infantry division with some tanks.
So it's chaps in trucks.
It's a bit more half tracks and stuff. Okay. It is definitely chaps in trucks, but it's also kind of reconnaissance, mobile infantry, mobile artillery, lots of SPs. Yeah.
And if they had a rough ride getting there as well.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Of course they have, yeah.
Everyone has.
All these things start to apply, don't they? It's the truth.
So on the 11th of June, most of the 6th Fallschirmjäger is withdrawn from Carentan anyway, and in broad daylight, but a skeleton force is left. And the plan is to launch a joint counterattack the next day with 17th SS and the bulk of what is left of 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. Yeah. And this is where Dick Winter and co come in, because the 506th PIR, Parachute Infantry Regiment, move up overnight on the 11th of 12th of June. This is where they're silhouetted against the sky, waiting for snipers to hit them in the TV.
Exactly, yeah.
So this is all the flooded bits.
Yeah, but this is also, I mean, the famous scene where they fired on, everyone freezes and Winters gets up and says...
Exactly, because the routine is this one road from the south. So they're going in, and it's on a kind of raised bed, and again, they've all been sort of slightly canalised by all this flooding and all the rest of it. So they go in there, and it's this one machine gun, basically, in a kind of building at the end of the road. Yeah. And as you say, he gets up and gets them. But this is one of the problems of MG42s, is they're not very accurate. So as long as you keep moving, you are going to overwhelm them, and of course that's exactly what happens.
Well, and we're talking about, I mean, the 101st, let's put it this way, they're very motivated soldiers, aren't they? So, with very motivated officers. So he's going to say, get up off your asses, and they're going to do as they're told.
And they're going to do it, and they do. And you do, where it's portrayed very accurately in the Band of Brothers series, is you do see those Germans, Fallschirmjäger, sort of fleeing across in broad daylight again. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens. So it's taken that morning. That's that. Yeah. And the following day, the 12th of June. That's when the link up happens. Yeah. And it happens north of Carentan.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because at the other end of the lodgement, they don't get to Caen on day one. Well, Carentan itself, let's look at how it's going everywhere, and how sticky things are everywhere. Not everything fell on D-Day in other places either. So you need a sense of proportion.
And also, it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
So what is really interesting is that the place where they link up is a historic site. It's a known point on the road, kind of northeast of Carentan, on the road down from Grand Camp Maisie. Yeah. It's an absolute flea pit. It's like this sort of ruined concrete building that looks really horrible. Yeah. There's no reason to go there whatsoever. There's lots of fly tipping. But this is this moment of historic importance.
Well, historic moments are marked in different ways.
Yeah. But meanwhile...
Yeah.
Meanwhile, first clashes between Panzer Lehr and 8th Armoured Brigade and 50th Division all happening, and the 49th Division, which are just about to come up and take over. The 49th Bears about to come up and take up. But the The Sherwood Rangers, for example, their headquarters in Saint-Pierre, which is just north of Tilly-sur-Seul, is hit. Yeah. And the Mike Laycock, who's the commander, he's killed, as is George Jones and the intelligence officer. And Lawrence Head. They're all killed. And this is what puts Stanley Christopherson in charge.
Yeah.
So, these are fairly mega clashes.
Is there a book about that?
Yeah, there is actually. It's called Brothers in Arms.
The audio book I hear is very, very good.
Yeah, it is. Do you know what I'm listening to at the moment? Because I'm on duty over there next week, and I'm having to bone up.
But there is a big.
I've been listening to a lot of you recently.
I'm sorry.
No, all of Burma last week. Actually, very good.
That's also a good book too. Yeah, but the British are looking for ways to speed things along, which is, I think, interesting, given that one of the things that supposedly characterises this campaign is Monty's caution. But 1st Airborne, for instance, and this is one of the fabled cancelled operations, Operation Wild Oats.
Don't you love it?
I do. And the idea is they're going to take Carpiquet Airport. They're going to land on Carpiquet Airport, and 7th Armored are going to roll up and relieve them. And that's knocked on the head by Lee Mallory, who Monty calls a gutless bugger.
Yeah, maybe we should have a T-shirt with a Sherman tank on it and a paratrooper, and then a big cross over it, and just say Wild Oats.
Well, or a picture of Lee Mallory that just says gutless bugger.
Yeah, even better.
But just as well it doesn't happen, because it's probably one of those things that would have ended in dislocation and disaster, because you're going to do that at night, you're going to do that during the day, blah, 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 and so on. But there is a gap.
Yep.
But the Germans are showing up, is the point. So there are more and more panzers in Normandy now. But
they're not all there yet. So the first 3 divisions to arrive are the 12th SS, who we talked about, the Panzer Lehr, who we've talked about, and obviously now the Gertz von Berlichingen, 17th Panzer Grenadier, and but they're obviously way over.
Yeah.
So it's really between kind of 21st Panzer remnants of, who are kind of focused on Breville Ridge and immediately around Caen, then 12th SS, who are around sort of Carpiquet, that kind of neck of the woods, and then Panzer Lehr, and it's the gap between those two which is the kind of the potential opportunity.
But it's piecemeal. So if the German way of war earlier in the war is characterised by you summon everyone up into a single panzer punch fist that you bash through the enemy lines, they're not doing that. They're not doing what they did at Barbarossa. They're not doing what they did in the Ardennes in 1940. They're not doing what they did in the desert. So it's this piecemeal thing that is offering a gap, but also negating the combat power of the panzers arriving in Normandy in the first place. Right?
Yes, exactly. But the idea behind Operation Perch is that you go between 12th SS, which are kind of hugging the western side of Caen, and Panzer Lehr, which are very much in that kind of central bit around Tilly-sur-Seul, fighting the Sherwood Rangers, etc. Around there, and you cut down below, and you go to a little town called Villers-Bocage, and you swing round behind 12th and then come in and encircle Caen from the south. It's always an optimistic plan. Let's be completely clear about this. Yeah. So this is kind of, again, it's a bit like sort of getting to Caen on day one. It's at the upper reaches of what's possible, but there's a clear gap. Lots of other SS divisions which are on their way haven't arrived there yet. Yep. It's an opportunity. It's worth the punt.
Yeah.
And so anyway, they swan through, and they make 7th Armoured Division, rather, the Desert Rats. They're in Normandy by the 10th of June, and they go for it, and by the morning of 8 a.m. the 13th of June, they're in Villers-Bocage, which is a kind of sort of one-horse town. It's not quite it's like a main street, and then there's another street which runs parallel.
Roman road that runs up a hill.
Runs up a hill to point 213, as it's called.
Exactly. And
there's a parallel road south of it.
Yeah. And they drive up to the top of the hill, get there.
But they also, the whole load of them just sort of, pause for a break. This is the 4th County of London Yeomanry.
Yes.
And the 1st Battalion, the Rifle Brigade, so they're in a mixture of sort of carriers, trucks.
Yep.
There are some Cromwell tanks and also a whole load of Shermans. And all the people come out, they're all very happy about it. But just by complete bad fortune, or just fluke, or whichever way you want to look at it, the previous night, the Heavy Panzer Battalion 101, which is commanded by the infamous Michael Wittmann, has arrived and is leaguered up just in the southern lee of point 213.
Yep.
And I've been along that track, and you can see exactly why he would go there and exactly why he would leaguer up there. There's a few sort of, isolated farmhouses. It's protected from the north by the hill.
Yep.
There's lots of foliage, so you'd be covered there. It's a really good place to park up.
Because after all, you're worried about air attack.
Exactly
So he's the wearaboo pin-up, though. Let's make no mistake.
Yeah. But they get up in the morning and they realise that there's this British armoured column, and they're there because he can hear them clanging and shouting and kind of making a bit of a noise. So he sends off some of his Tigers to go and look at this while he goes into the town, and he just goes off on his own without any infantry whatsoever. He runs down the parallel road to the main drag,
firing.
So the turret is at kind of 90 degrees. And firing down, and he's really lucky because there's a 6-pounder anti-tank gun at literally point-blank range. You're talking about 150 yards. Yeah. And it just happens that the gunner's having a leak, having a slash at that particular moment, and so he doesn't get him. But he does get his Tiger knocked out that day.
Yeah. Well, eventually, yes, but it's a great PR coup for the.
Yes, because there's German photographers there, but it does turn into quite a big ding dong, and actually they lose 6 Tigers and a further 6 to 8 tanks themselves. The British lose kind of sort of 23 to 27 tanks over the 2 days.
But as a proportion of what you've got and how affordable it is losing it, that's a lot. That's I know some people say this is sort of number crunching to find a fig leaf for 7th Armoured's embarrassment in this situation. But actually, if you're looking at Normandy as a numbers game and an attritional thing, then there it is. That's actually tipped in the Allies' favour.
Well, it's just a total non-event. I mean, Operation Perch never had much chance of succeeding. Yeah. It was always ambitious. It was a kind of sort of test the water kind of thing. They came up against some heavy Germans, and that was the end of it. Yeah. And it's a small tactical engagement which has had a kind of sort of a history and narrative to it out of all proportion to the scale of its importance in the big scheme of things.
The thing is,
let's forget also the 21st Panzer loses 13 tanks in fewer minutes on D-Day.
Exactly.
No one getting excited about that.
No one gets excited about that. And this encounter becomes one of the sort of, in Parliament it's used to browbeat British tank procurement for whatever.
Well, how dare those people? What do they know about it?
But had 7th Armour had Tigers in Villers-Bocage, he'd have pegged them all from the side anyway at that range with an 88mm gun.
It's got nothing to do with it.
It's literally got nothing to do with it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They get caught with their trousers down, and it's just as simple as that. But meanwhile, 6th Airborne's having a torrid time because they're trying to kind of clear the whole of Breville Ridge. They've got some guys on the high ground immediately, but then they get pushed back from that northern bit of the coming over the coast. What would have been Band Beach, and 12th Para, for example, loses 141 casualties out of 160 on the Breville Ridge. The 5th Black Watch from 51st Ireland Division is brought in. Yeah.
And they get absolutely marmalised.
There's a memorial.
An encounter between Otway and the 5th Battalion Black Watch commanding officer where he goes, you're not going across the field like that, are you? He says, no, this is how we do it. And they march in order. He says, machine guns all the way down the other side of that field. Yep. You're absolutely crazy. And the Black Watch chap says, well, this is how we do it, old boy. And they get
absolutely
smashed up. Yeah.
But they do take the Breville Ridge, so that's good. And that then becomes the front line for basically until the middle of August.
Yeah.
That's there.
And the Bois de Bavon has 8 Para in it who basically run interference out of the Bois de Bavon on all the roads around it and make it impassable for the Germans, so the Germans give up on it.
But meanwhile, the V1's starting to fall because the first meanwhiles. We could call them meanwhiles, actually. The first V1s fall in Kent on the 13th of June, and each one of these has got 1,000, a ton of amatol. And WSC says, come on, this is your moment.
New form of attack imposed upon the people of London was a burden perhaps even heavier than the air waves of 1940 and 1941. Suspense and strain were more prolonged. Dawn brought no relief and cloud no comfort.
Nazis. Anyway, so and I think thinking back on it now, I could have made this point a bit stronger when I was writing my Normandy book, because I think this absolutely changes the Normandy campaign out of all proportion, because this is the pressure point.
Well, this is where all the political pressure to hurry up and get on with it.
All of it comes from that. And you can understand why.
Well, you can understand why, but also it's not particularly realistic political pressure, because you're going to get hurry up so we can get to Holland and stop this.
Yeah, but that's where that impatience is being driven from.
I mean, we touched on it earlier that this is the UK's bloodiest month, I think, June of 1944,
Yep.
in the war, and it's so much to do with this that the Germans reopening the Blitz front, and I think you're absolutely right, and it gets forgotten. It
does get forgotten.
Sort of or compartmentalised in the story of the Second World War.
Yep. And this is the problem. They've got this huge build-up going on. So the significance of the 12th of June and the link-up is that suddenly they've got the bridgehead. That is now the bridgehead. It is completely joined up. Everything's going on. It is increasingly likely that they're not going to be thrown back into the sea now, although the jury is out a bit because we still haven't got the bulk of the 10 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier. The mobile divisions haven't all arrived, so we don't know quite what that's going to look like. But, with every day that's passing, more materials coming, and that's all very much to the good. Yeah. Interestingly, Allied air power is also completely showing why it's so dominant, why it's so important, why it's such a key part of the whole thing, and why, when we're telling the Normandy story, it should never be far away from the narrative. Yeah. It's really important to stress this. So on the 9th of June, for example, Gerd von Schweppenberg, who's the Panzer Group West commander, his headquarter is hit by Yarbos. He's incredibly lucky to not be there at the time. I mean, misses it by a whisker, but the Chief of Staff, General Sigismund Ritter und Edler von Douwens is killed, plus 12, I love saying that, plus 12 staff officers. Yeah. 3 days later, General Marx is killed. Yeah. He's told, whatever you do, don't go. He rushes off to Carentan. Yeah. I mean, why? Don't need to be there. Gets shot up, gets hit in the groin, bleeds out. And that's him gone.
Yes, but this is personal generalship, isn't it? Going forward, finding out what's going on,
Yeah, sometimes, I know. Well, but you can tell he's been on the Eastern Front, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. He's not used to...
Bearline's not doing that.
Yeah, he's not... Yes, exactly. He's not expecting to be attacked by aircraft, yeah. But it is that... It's personal generalship, isn't it? And if it goes well, then everyone says, what a chap. He was right. He was right down the front with the boys, and he was figuring out what was going on. And however...
What I think is absolutely amazing is that by Thursday the 15th of June, 5 airfields have been built on the bridgehead. Yeah. By the 20th of June, that number is 12.
So a fortnight after today.
Yeah, B2, which when we go to Normandy, we'll definitely have a look at. B2 is Basenville, and it's when you go there, it's just north of Crepon, where Stanley Hollis does the second part of his VC. Yeah. And when you go there, you just go, yeah, of course. Yeah. In fact, actually, there's 2 airfields there. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely enormous, and this is where 602 Squadron comes in. Yeah. Pierre Klosterman fights in the big show. Yeah. Brilliant bit. He comes in and he's wearing his number ones because it's France, and he really regrets it because the dust goes absolutely everywhere. Yeah, and then a Junkers 88 alone sort of jitter raid. Junkers comes over the first night, and he cowers under a truck, which the following morning discovers is full of ammunition. But the battle is continuing. There's no major all-out offensive by the Allies, nor a major counterattack by the Germans. But it's really, really tough fighting all the same, marked by really hard fought local objectives, immense amount of digging in and carrying foxholes, and mortars and artillery banging and crashing back and forth. Incredibly hard fighting. 17th of June is a big moment as well, because Rommel visits Hitler at Margeval. It's the last time he comes to France, the Führer. Yep. And he pleads to be allowed to abandon the Cotentin Peninsula before it's too late. And this makes perfect sense, because clearly they're not going to win, and those divisions are better used on a kind of connected southern front. Yeah. Hitler goes, no! The fortress of Cherbourg will be held at all costs.
There you go. Stereo Hitlers, everyone.
Yeah. So,
but the thing is Hitler's... You try and rationalise that. There's a port in Cherbourg. Hitler's thinking, we can't give them a port, right? If we give them a port, they can resupply, because he hasn't imagined the Mulberry. Because the Germans have... It's not part of their thinking at all. Which we...
but wake up, look at Anzio.
I know. Well, I know. Wake up, look at Anzio. But this is the point. Again, we keep.
Okay, analyse your defeats. Analyse what's happened in previous wars and apply those lessons instantly. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket science to work out that the Allies have amassed, but they're 4,500 tons a day.
No, but they're using their rocket scientists to build V2s.
To rockets, right? Yeah. But anyway, so Montgomery is preparing with Dempsey, who's the General Miles Dempsey, who's the commander of the Second Army. He's gearing up for the first great offensive when disaster strikes. And this is, of course, the Great Storm, which breaks on the 19th of June, 1944.
The enemy gets a vote, and so does the weather.
Yes, indeed. Again.
Well, we'll be back once the Great Storm has blown itself out for our next episode.
And see what happens.
If you want to listen to these without adverts, and I imagine you do, because it's gripping stuff, and you want to listen to them one after another in a great torrent of D-Day Overlord information, go to our Apple channel, subscription channel, or become a Patreon. We have ways of making you talk Patreon. But that's the end of the commercials. We'll see you later. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Cheerio.